Suzanne Hagna, Director of Information and Learning Technology for Byron Public Schools. And today our cohort has going to be speaking with George Couros, who has written Innovator's Mindset. And our students have been reading this book and discussing it for the past few weeks. They have a few questions that they would like to pose to George. And George, go ahead and introduce yourself and anything else you want to say before we begin.
Yeah, I'm George Couros. Just got back from Misty. I worked for Parkland School Division, I think, for the last 10 or 11 years, and just on a sabbatical, but actually resigned as of official yesterday, I think. So, yeah, so my work is in looking at innovation and education. How we connect with other people. Someone just jumped in there. Hey, Tracy, or is it Tracy? Hi, Tracy.
I just
muted. So I think the book is, you know, partially my experiences that I'm seeing other people, you know, share, and some of my research, but it's also a lot of personal stories as well.
Okay, well, I think we have a few questions that they've been asking, and so we'll just start with that. And the first question is, how do you create staff buy-in with staff who do not like the way who like to do it the way it's always done on something that's new and innovative? And this is from Kirsten.
Well, I think that's probably the last part of the book really focuses on how do you actually, you know, get staff to, you know, learn to embrace change. And I think, and when you say change, it has to be meaningful change. And I think that really simple thing that I talk about is the idea is that why do staff actually have to embrace something different? I think, like, why is it imperative? And one of the things is that a lot of the initiatives that you actually see from schools, they are different, but there's no reason, there's no compelling reason on why we should actually embrace them. And so I think a lot of teachers have been burned by that. You know, they put all this time into something and then it just moves out. So I think that the only thing that you can control is yourself. And so when I'm trying to help other people embrace stuff, I always start with the question, what is best for kids? And then whatever we're looking at embracing or we're looking at moving forward on, I have to be able to justify how that is truly best for kids. And if we have agreement on that, and I think that when I don't know anybody in education that would say, no, it's not what's best for kids. I don't know anyone. So when we have that agreement and we move backwards from there, I think it really helps to do this, because if I can prove that it's truly best for kids and you agree that's what we're both here to do, then and I work backwards from there, there's really not much of an argument you can make after the case. Unless you have a different version of what is best for kids, and which I should, you know, listen to. But I think that a lot of times we just, like, you see, like, you know, I see a lot of people sharing things that they're doing, and they're really look fun, and they're all, like, flashy and, you know, like, neat, but they're not necessarily doing anything that's really empowering kids or, you know, or really getting excited for learning. And it's not that to say that joy isn't important, but I think there's really kind of going into something much deeper to prove why it's important.
I just have a question to piggyback off on that. So one of the ideas for kind of a focus on PD next year is, you know, really about inspiring students to learn, you know, to learn. And do you think that is an idea that could, I mean, I would have to guess that staff would all agree that we want to inspire our learners.
Right.
You know, would that be a focus that, you know, could have some traction? Are you aware of anything that other districts or schools that have done that have really empowered educators to, you know, thus empower their students?
I think, you know, like, you hear things like Genius Hour and like design thinking. I think it's really one of the shifts that I think that is really crucial, and I do talk about this quite a bit in the notion of empowerment versus engagement. And it's not like it's an either or, but it is on, are you looking at simply engaging kids, which I think, you know, if I'm like Robin Williams, Dead Poets Society type teacher, I can really engage kids, they can learn stuff, but what happens after the fact? And so I think that when we look at empowering, it's kids are the thing. Why I'm comfortable, like why I always challenge even myself the notion of engagement versus empowerment is they're not separated. Is that part of it is that you can be engaged without being empowered, but if you're empowered, you're probably engaged in what you're doing. And so I think that that's a big shift on how do people look at, how do kids create? How do they take ownership over their learning? And I think that empowerment is something that's really important, through embracing all of this.
Okay. Corey has a question. We just got done with the first question.
Okay.
So we are talking about how do you empower staff, teachers, but you have a question about administrators.
Yes, I'm wondering if you are a teacher and you don't necessarily have the administration or the school board having an innovator's mindset, how do you encourage them to get that same mindset?
Well, I think that and this was, I know you just missed the earlier question that we were talking about it, but it does really tie back into the notion of what's best for kids. And even when you are a teacher working with a principal who on the hierarchy is above you, a lot of times teachers will go to like a tech conference and they'll see all these really cool things and then immediately like, oh, I want to do this in my class. And so principals will do everything so that they can have that. Teacher uses it once, never touches it again. And I've seen that quite often. And so I think that sometimes we have to, like I'm really a big believer in like saying yes, but you should also ask questions, right? And I think that it goes both ways. But how do I, justify the work that I'm doing to my principal and how it's best for kids? Like, is it more than I just saw this at a conference? Or, hey, I saw this at a conference, I've been doing it for a while for my own personal view, and here's what I can see the implications are for kids. And I think that a lot of times when teachers are working with administrators and they don't embrace you can blame the administrator for not taking risks, but a lot of times the teacher cannot truly articulate from the viewpoint of a learner how it is beneficial. And I think that's why like all of us should actually have the notion that part of teaching is research. Not just the researchers, but every single educator should do that, should look at it to understand the notion of learning from the viewpoint of a learner, not only a teacher.
Okay, I have one question from somebody that wasn't able to come, but it's a really good question. So as teachers who are trying to innovate and appreciate autonomy, in what specific ways should we ask for help from our school leaders?
Well, that depends on what you mean by autonomy, right? Does autonomy mean I can go do whatever I want, or does autonomy mean I can lead to the vision of what we do as a school in the way that I see it fits best? Because I think that when you look at the notion of autonomy, that means just back off and just let me do what I want. So I think that. And I wrote about this the other day, and I've had lots of conversations about this recently, the importance of a singular vision in a school district. You have like, it is extremely hard for every educator to be on board with a singular vision and achieve it. But it is even harder to have 100 different visions, and you have to be accountable to different things. So I think that one of the things that we did really well in our school division is that we had 22 different schools, 22 different visions, 22 different missions, and plus the district and mission, and plus the school, like plus the tech team, plus this. And what we did is we said there's going to be one, and it's going to be all-encompassing, every single school, every place. And we didn't just, like, somebody didn't just come in and make it for us. There was lots of consultation. There was work together. So there was ownership at all levels. But the autonomy that happens is that this district that's in a very urban center versus this school that's in a very rural area, how they get to the vision looks different. So I think that when you have a singular vision, and a lot of people use Daniel Pink's work, they'll talk about, motivation comes through autonomy, but he also talks about the notion of purpose, which many educators leave out. And I think that the vision becomes the purpose, that you are a part of something greater, so that the work that you're doing is not only impacting the kids you directly work with, but, our organization as a whole. So I think that when autonomy is extremely important towards the singular vision, right? So like a lot of people talk about, oh, well, Google did 20% time and people could do whatever they want. Well, not really. Like if they wanted to take up knitting, that's not what they're doing with their time. They would have to do something that furthered Google's vision, Google's mission. It's not just do what you want. And I think that's an element that a lot of people leave out.
Okay, so we have another question from Corey. There you are.
I was wondering, what's the best way to put this type of philosophy into practice district-wide, specifically with the district size? And you kind of just talked about this a little bit, but we have 4 buildings. One is pre-K through 2, one is 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and then our high school is 9 through 12. And I'm just kind of wondering, you know, how do you make the whole school district embrace this?
Embrace the singular vision?
Mm-hmm.
Embrace what? Specifically?
Embrace having the innovator's mindset. Embrace, you know, innovation within the whole district, starting with our youngest learners all the way up to our 12th graders.
Well, I think that one of the elements of the book that I think I really try to focus on is the notion of defining what innovation is. Because if you actually talk about innovation to many people, they just go on and on and on about stuff, and nobody knows what they actually said by the end of it. So try to simplify the notion that, you know, innovation is about new and better. Very simple. And so, and I talk about it can be iteration, you know, an adjustment of, you know, something that you've done before, or invention, something totally new. But what is crucial, it has to be better. And I think that one of the graphs, who said this? To me, innovation is thinking outside the box. Where are you?
That's Tracy. Hold on.
I don't agree with that, actually.
You don't?
No, I don't. And I actually, it's funny. Have you read the book? I'm gonna question. I'm gonna start throwing some questions at you.
They haven't got to the last 2 chapters, but yes, they have been reading the book.
Okay. So the notion, I actually talk about the notion of innovating inside of the box. So the thing is that within a school system, there are certain requirements, and I think this is actually extremely crucial point in the notion of education today, because you still have to do standardized tests. You still have a certain amount of curriculum minutes you have to meet. You have certain things that you have to do that if you don't do them, so you are in a box in some constraint, in some ways. That this is the box that you have. And so within that box, how do you bring these things to life? And so innovation totally can happen outside of the box, but we don't talk about the notion of inside of the box thinking. And the analogy that I use in the book is Vine. There's a 6-second limit, and a bunch of people said, what do you do with 6 seconds? And then a lot of other people said, oh my God, think of all the things I can do with 6 seconds. It is just a shift in thinking. And I think that's what's a really crucial point to this, is simply define it so people understand that it's not, a lot of people will see innovation as, oh, I got to use all this new tech stuff. But it is really about new and better thinking. So how does it actually lead to improvement? How does it actually lead to things that are better for kids? And I know there's a lot of educators, a lot of speakers that, you know, if they could, they would blow up school. But that's not our reality. The reality of what we have is you know, public schools are funded by governments. Governments are, you know, accountable to, you know, voters. They have certain requirements. We can't just do whatever we want. If you want to do whatever you want, that's where you start a private school, right? But if you work in the public school system, there are certain things that we have to work with inside of to make, like I can say, hey, just do whatever you want, and you could do amazing things, but you might not have a job by the end of the year. So it's not necessarily, so how do you actually think within that constraint? And I think that it's giving people freedom to understand that it's going beyond simply technology. It's a way of thinking. And what it looks like to a kindergarten kid could look different to a high school kid. But what is crucial is we're always striving for better. We're always striving to do better. And best practice 10 years ago could be irrelevant practice today. And I think that's what we have to understand. But best practice 10 years ago could still be best practice today. So we have to understand that it's just a constant reflection, revision. And you see that we expect our kids to be constant learners, yeah, we're reluctant to this in many ways in education. And I think that is really important to understand is how do we continuously grow? How do we continuously develop? Right? And so if you do the same thing 30 years, you know, every single year, are you actually reflecting what you would want from your students?
Okay.
I'm going to give you a test question later, too.
Okay. Somebody might
now no one's going to talk to me.
Here, let me make sure that this one is muted. Yeah, sure. Okay. So one of the questions we have is about empowerment, engagement of students.
Yeah.
And how do you measure that? So, you know, if teachers need to be, right now our district, they're being observed, and that's been a kind of a focus about engagement.
Right.
Have you seen any strategies that really measure engagement and or empowerment very well? And I think this is going to piggyback on one that Kirsten has too, or Kirsten has about e-portfolios. But what are your thoughts about measuring engagement and empowerment?
Well, I think that when you sometimes like when you this is not like something that's going to be quantified into numbers, and I think that's what a lot of people are looking for is how do I know a kid is empowered and how do I know the impact? And I think that you can get a lot of data in the sense of asking questions like, do you believe you have ownership over your learning? What are some of the things that you have done that have actually been sparked that you've done outside of school because of school? If you look at some really amazing projects that many kids do on YouTube, most of that is never done in school. Most of that is never even inspired in school. It's a totally separated thing. And so I think that you look at the data is not going to come out through numbers. It's going to come out through conversations. It's going to come out through even simple types of portfolios. Even when you look at a lot of portfolio work that's happening right now, it's not really empowered learning. It's teachers telling kids what to put in digitally so they can give to their parents. It's like a fancy report card system. How are kids actually taking ownership over their learning? How are they exploring things? And there's two elements of learning that I see that are really important is the notion of personalized learning and individualized learning. And so individualized is basically you have a path at the end, you have an objective at the end, and kids go in different ways to get there. And a lot of schools are doing that a lot better. But they talk about personalized learning, which is not really the same. Personalized learning is that they have different end goals and different paths. And so how do you create opportunities for both of those things, and where do you see those opportunities? Where are you collecting that data? And that's why I'm such a big proponent of digital portfolios, not digital dumps. There's too many, like, I'm just going to put all my links of work that I do and just put them in here so you can see them. There's no ownership. It's like the kid is asked to do something and then they put a link so they can show. It's a dump. Whereas my blog is my portfolio, and it's something much more powerful, and you see that even the book came from my blog in some sense because I saw what I was passionate about. I saw what there's a very powerful data coming out of my blog because you can see the last 6 years of my thinking, right? And it's not just what I've learned and decided to show you. It's my thinking. It's my growth over time, and I think that's a really important thing that we don't pay attention to. What are those looks you guys are giving? I'm just really curious because I saw you nodding your heads, going.
Well, it's funny because we're going down the road of e-portfolios right now,
right? And
I see a lot of the e-portfolio work that I've seen. It's a lot of teacher-directed, not a lot of opportunity for kind of creating their own personal path. And so we're talking about designing a system. We want to look at a K-12 system, and how do we include the components that we want the students to make sure they share, but then also have the components of how they're continuing to grow. So
Jen, if you ever actually take a look at my blog, it is a portfolio. It is totally tied in. If you actually, and the beautiful thing of it is a lot of people have no clue it's a portfolio, which I actually think is quite compelling. But it is aligned with the 7 principal quality standards that I'm expected to meet as an administrator. But they're kind of hidden in there. But if you said to me, George, how do you foster effective relationships, which is one of the standards that I'm expected to meet, that I know, since I know all 7 because I revisit them over and over again. If I go to that, I can actually show you evidence from the last 6 years of how I've been doing this. And a kid, but when you see what's happening in schools, they'll use something like, and it's not, please don't, this is not like a discredit to it's a discredit, to be honest with you, not to the software, but to our thinking on how we use the software. A teacher will use Seesaw for a year, and kids will put all this stuff, and then it's just there, and then they move to another space. But the other part of it is, like, when you're K to 12, there should be something that shows that growth and development over time, which is really powerful, and you could not do with paper. It changes the game when it's now digital. Even though I can show stuff, I can show samples of writing. If I was, like, really adamant about kids' cursive writing, that could still go into their digital portfolio to show that growth over time. But the element of it, too, is that a lot of times you use those portfolios, you totally grade them, you totally put marks on them, and then you wonder why kids don't want to use them, is because we own them. We own the process. We own what you put in them, as opposed to saying, hey, there's this really important part where we need some of this stuff for school because we need to prove the things that we're doing in school and how compelling this is. But the other part of this, too, is if a kid is really interested in this, do they have the freedom to go deeper into that and share that? And would we be bothered if it wasn't schoolwork, right? It has to. You have to get that space. So even though my my portfolio is aligned to the 7 principal quality standards, I've gone beyond that. So you can see links about my book. You can see my resume. You can see presentations I've done. You can also see one of the categories that I have, and I always say I have 7+1. The +1 is personal. So the day my father died, the day that my daughter. These are all things that are part of who I am as a person and a professional. But it's like we so separate school from life, right? It has to be so. And I hate to say this, employers aren't looking at kids' Seesaw accounts or Edmodo accounts, right? How do we actually connect these things and make something that is useful to these kids after time? This is something I'm very passionate about, because I think that we think a software is going to come save us and we're going to do these portfolios, as opposed to really thinking deeply of what this can mean for education.
Well, that's going to be great, because we are on that right now. And I know our time's short here, and you wanted to quiz.
No, that's fine. If they have any questions, so.
Any other questions that you guys have? Kirsten, I know you have one about ePortfolios. Did he answer your question, or do you want to ask another one?
Well, I guess he answered most of mine about his blog, because I've been looking back and forth from that resource that you gave in your book, George.
Yep.
But I just didn't know if you had any other suggestions now that things might have changed a little bit from when you wrote your book, or if you have any other insight as we move in this direction as a district.
The thing that I've listed as a portfolio is kind of interesting, is something that I have listed as that will be relevant 12 years from now. So if a kid started kindergarten right now, the system that I have actually talked about will be relevant to that kid at least 12 years ago. And like, people are like, how could you say that? Like, technology changes so dramatically. But I've actually seen how in the last 6 years, my portfolio has only grown in the exact same space that I've actually used over time. So the beautiful thing about why I use a blog as a portfolio is because it tackles some of the basic notions of reading and writing. So we actually see when kids are doing this, they're reading and writing more than ever, because they're not just reading, they're not just writing their reflections, they're commenting on other people's. They're actually responding to comments, which is a crucial skill in our world. Is how do we actually communicate online? How do we actually, say something while challenging people without offending them? This is something that we don't spend enough time on in our schools. But the beautiful thing about using a space like WordPress or EduBlogs, which if you're thinking about going K-12 portfolios, I would strongly suggest you look at EduBlogs. Even though you pay for it, I don't get paid a penny for saying this. I have no affiliation with them. I just believe in how they set it up. They have a beautiful blogging system, but if you just change it a little bit, it becomes a very nice portfolio. And I think more and more people are using their blog to summarize this. But whatever technology there is, if it's Instagram, if it's Vine, if it's YouTube, somehow you can use those services and still pull them into that portfolio. So I can even embed a tweet, and I do that often. Storify. So no matter what new technology comes in, blogs will continuously update that I can bring those things into that space. And I think that's a really important aspect of this, is that the blog as we know it will change 12 years from now, but you can still use that same space and it will still be relevant.
Okay, is there any other questions? Or George, if you want to, like I said, share your ideas or question us for anything around your book, that'd be great too.
Is it just for any of you in this room?
Yeah, well, sure.
So, what has, after reading the book, what has changed about any of your perspectives? Hopefully something. Maybe I shouldn't have asked.
I can go. I think you've already kind of touched on this when Tracy had said that innovation is thinking outside the box. Yeah. And I remember reading that chapter where you had talked about it's really inside the box, and I kind of just sat there for a moment and I was like, he's totally right, because you can't think outside unless you start thinking about what you have to work with and how you can bring that to the table and make it better than what you know, our standardized tests say that we should make it. So I like that.
I was with somebody who said, you know, how do I do all this stuff and teach the curriculum? I'm like, well, you do it together. And that's like, so I just went through their curriculum and I started pulling things out and say, this is how I would teach this. So the curriculum, and this is maybe something I can say as a Canadian, because I know in some states, it is not a script. It is not, you have to do this day, this way. It is things that, you know, mostly like, hey, we need kids to know this. And so I'm still obligated as an educator to teach the curriculum. But the artistry of education, that's up to me. The art of how I teach it is really important. And I think that the more empowered teachers are, the more empowered students are, the more we can do with inside of that curriculum. So I think it is a really important aspect to think about.
I would say one of the things that have changed for me, George, is, you know, I always had this, I just wanted to get rid of the way school is, just build it from the ground up. And, you know, I think that for me as, you know, a tech director, and you don't have to totally change the system, even though it still drives me crazy. But what are the opportunities to innovate within the system? And I think there's a couple of the characteristics that have really helped me this year,
right.
And that's empathy and observant. And I've had some experiences this year where I've been able to go in with a principal and just observe what's going on in a classroom situation, you know, where I can be of support, or ideas that I've seen there can be spread to other places. I think that I'd really want to start working on that observation more, because I think there's a lot of opportunities for solutions through observation.
Well, and I think that one of the things that I think is really important to all of this is that when I talk about the notion of observant, it's actually paying attention to what's going around all of us, not only in education. And I can take, one of the things that I know I have a strength in is I can take the most obscure video that has nothing to do with anything, that is very funny, and I can tie it to education somehow. And I can take that, because part of it is I'm looking. And I think that's a really important part, is that if you're looking, like, you know, how does this tie, you know, I see this, and like, you know, even you look at people using Twitter. Twitter was never meant to be this educational tool. But somebody saw how people are using it, and they started like paying attention to it, and then they started tying this thing that was so obscure into this technology that, you know, is now a must for educators. But that was never the way that it was meant to be used. And so I think that part of it is that, are we looking for those opportunities? Are we paying attention to these things and how they actually make an impact? And you'll see one of the things, and I don't want to feel like I'm like, I hate tech companies, because I think they do some amazing things, but one of the things that you see a lot of tech companies do is they'll see something that educators are embracing, and then they'll make, oh, this is like the Facebook of education. This is like the Twitter of education. And I'm like, why aren't you just using Facebook? Like, why aren't you just using Twitter? It's way easier, right? And so and the thing is, you can make the Facebook of education, but then you separate school from world. And I think that we need to pay attention to what these things are happening, because simple things like privacy and how what information they're giving, do we teach kids that if we're not using Facebook? If we're not, if we're not paying attention to it, if we're not paying attention to the world that, this is one of my favorite things that drives me crazy. The notion of the world our kids live in. Well, we actually live in the exact same world. We don't live in two separate worlds. It's not like Adultland and Kidville, right? It's one world, and I think that's a really important aspect, is understanding that there are school districts that are planning for 2030 that are not caught up to 2000, and so we gotta pay attention to what's happening around us to ensure kids are, they're doing things right now that are helpful, that we're preparing them for when everybody Googles everybody, what have we done? What have we done? And you go, I still go to schools today. More and more kids, this is a good thing, more and more kids know not to post bad things online that you can find. They know this. But the percentage of kids knowing to post good things online is still insanely small.
I like that.
So that's something that we need to pay attention to.
That's great, George. I really appreciate this. Unless there's any other comments, this has been a great discussion, and it's very applicable to what we're doing right now, and really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys reading the book. I hope it's pushing your thinking, and hopefully we're trying to go not just what we learn, but what we do with what we know, and I think that's a really important element of the work we need to do in education today.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to stop the broadcast, so thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.